So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and forgive me to everybody that I only have about 15 minutes because I've got another meeting to go to, an in-person one. Can I say thank you so much to SARI? I didn't know much about SARI at all, in fact, before Alex contacted me, but I've heard so much about you. My connection with Bristol are quite small, in a sense. My daughter studied at Bristol University. Martin, she studied law at Bristol University, and she now works for a human rights firm in London. So, maybe she's following in my footsteps. I hope so. But from my perspective, I wanted to share a few of my thoughts, as I did recently at the Islamophobia conference in Bristol, around the aftermath of the riots. Those of us who are old enough, street riots have occurred in the UK every decade, and Bristol has never been far from where they happen. And they've been sparked by a variety of things, very often, or more often not, underlying social, economic, and racial tensions. And what we discovered this August was quite appalling in many respects. Those of you who don't know me, I was chief prosecutor for London, and then after that, Northwest England. And then I left prosecuting in 2015. I became chief executive of the country's police commissioners, national advisor to the Welsh government, member of the Press Standards Organisation. And as it currently stands today, I'm the Chancellor of the University of Manchester, chair of the Church of England Safeguarding Panel. Yes, this Muslim boy from Birmingham is the chair of the Church of England Safeguarding Panel. But prior to that, I was the founding chair of the Catholic Church's Safeguarding Regulator. And I'm also chair of the Lowry Theatre and the board member of the Creative Industries Authority. So I've dedicated my life now to safeguarding, and in large part it's because, like you, I believe that a society is judged by how it looks after its most vulnerable. And as Martin indicated a moment ago, it doesn't matter who you are and what position you hold, nobody's immune from it. Bizarrely, over the last few days and weeks, you would think that the only type of racism is anti-white racism, because there's been some substantial amount of publicity about various adverts going out to enable only Black and brown people to apply for internships, not recognizing the reason why that happens is because we're not there. We aren't at that table. And it's an attempt by institutions, finally, to try and deal with the disproportionality. It's not anti-white racism. It's simply giving Black and brown people, people of color, people from minoritized communities, the opportunities that they have been denied, despite the potential that we know exists within those communities. And we know that's racism. The bizarre thing is, the people who are now talking about anti-white racism are the people who've denied that racism exists at all. We know, for example, on health inequality, COVID put a spotlight on that. If you're a Black woman, you're 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than you are if you were a white woman. We know that if you remember the first few weeks, I lost my brother in the first 2 weeks of COVID. A substantial number of people from minoritized communities lost their lives, particularly those working in public-facing roles, and that invariably they were disproportionately from people of color. Then NHS leaders, I think at the last count, in fact, you may be one of the only ones of the top 50 NHS trusts. Only one CEO at the last count was from a person of color. Yet the NHS is 25-30% staff from those communities. On education, look around the country, the head teachers and principals, and tell me that we have the same opportunities as the white majority do. For the first time ever, we now have 2 cabinet ministers from Parswood Comprehensive School. We have more ministers from the comprehensive school at Parswood in Manchester than we do from Eton. And that has taken us 500 years to get to the stage where a state school has more representation at cabinet. But we know that deprived communities are deprived of the best teachers too. And I was a chair of a further education college. I can tell you that the challenges we face as a Chancellor of University, I can tell you that it's still extraordinarily telling that Black and brown people, people of color, those from minoritized communities are not getting the same opportunities that others are. As a lawyer, Martin, you will know this, disproportionate stop and search. you're 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're a black person. You're in fact more likely to be arrested, stopped, arrested, charged, convicted, sentenced as a black person than you are a white person on the same evidence. And that's all the academic research that you need to know. So it's not anecdotal, that's academic. I've dealt with, I haven't got a lot of time, but I've done a memoir called The Prosecutor, and I've also written a book called The Race to the Top, which is about senior leaders in minoritized communities and their experiences. And I talk about how I forced a district judge to step down because of his racism. He simply told one of my prosecutors that a witness should attend in court this afternoon, despite the fact that it wasn't listed. And when was told that the witness, Patel, couldn't make it, he went into a strop and said, well, that person can't have a really important job. Dr. Patel, as it was, did have a very important job. And ultimately, I managed to persuade the judiciary to get rid of him, and then discovered that he was also an immigration judge. So you tell me what kind of decisions he's been taking in that environment. And many judges, if you go back and if you Google it, you can see the Times wrote about minoritized judges talking about their experiences, judges facing bullying within the judiciary, and none of them could speak up publicly. So I had to speak up on their behalf, and wrote about it in the Times 4 or 5 years ago, because it doesn't matter where you are, you're not immune from racism in business. The amount of investment into black and brown businesses is extremely low. Particularly women of color are suffering tremendously. Wearing my creative industries authority hat in arts and culture, look at who runs the theatres, look at who runs film, music and TV, and tell me again that we don't have a problem. Look at sport. Look at how Simone Biles was treated, the world's greatest gymnast, and then think about in football when we had the 3 penalty misses and how Rashford, Sancho, and Saka were treated in the immediate aftermath of that. The reality is it doesn't matter. There is what we have now is a race to be the most racist, and whether it's in politics or whether it's in any institution. And of course, our failures, if we're people of color, our failures are amplified. Even our successes. Some of you will know I prosecuted the Rochdale grooming gang 13, 14 years ago, which was a massive success in the sense that it was an issue that wasn't being addressed mainly by the state. We brought men to justice. We put a spotlight on the fact that the abuse of women and girls was taking place, and that certain groups of women were simply, certain groups, women entirely, were being ignored. And the far right then came for me, despite the fact that I was the only one that made all the right decisions in that case. And again, it isn't public knowledge, but literally they put out stuff on their websites suggesting that I had been the one not to prosecute, which is 180 degrees from the truth. But it led then, having prosecuted the worst cases you can possibly imagine, I'd never had anybody come to my door. Suddenly I had far-right thugs trying to break into my house. I had 17,000 letters and emails sent to my teams calling for me to be sacked and deported. I was born in Birmingham. And then I had to have police protection. I had my children had to go to school in taxis because that was the security advice I was given. And they came very close to breaking me. And they did so even though I was the one who got everything right, because I damaged their narrative. Their narrative is that all people of color are rapists. When they discovered that a person of color was the one that brought these people to justice, they couldn't have that. And literally, had I been called John Smith, they'd have been carrying me on the streets through Westminster on their shoulders. But because I wasn't, they decided to try and destroy me. And that's what happens. So even your successes are ignored. If your failures are amplified, think of how many black football managers have one go. And never be re-employed, whereas Sam Allardyce will get a job every week. The reality is that we're treated extraordinarily differently. We're blamed pretty much for everything that happens to us. And look at disciplinary hearings in all the various professions, and there's a disproportionate number of people in those organizations that are people of color. Going back to the riots, we've got to address what caused the Islamophobia, what caused the attacks. And we've got to do a number of things in the short time I have. We have to counter far-right narratives through public campaigns. And that's, I think, what SARI are doing and others need to do. We need to promote inclusion, tolerance, diversity, debunking the myths. The reality is, some people said to me, the only reason that you can't get an appointment with a doctor because because there are so many people from minorities here. The reality is that you can only get an appointment with a doctor because there are so many people from minorities here. We are the doctors, we are the nurses, we are the midwives, we are the people who are looking after our communities. But so we've got to challenge all those myths. We have to have media literacy programs playing a key role in helping people, particularly young people, critically assess the information they consume. And it really is concerning the number of young people that were involved in the August riots. We've got to regulate online platforms to curb hate speech. We've got to call it out. And I get tons of it. I no longer read notifications because it's damaging to the soul. You've got to promote community engagement. You've got to promote social cohesion. You've got to work with civil society. That means working with you, SARI, to address racism and bigotry, because the civil society organizations are trusted. Institutions, others are not trusted. You're trusted, and therefore government should partner with you and others to ensure that they promote tolerance, address racism. And we need to ensure there's robust political leadership against extremism. So we have to take a firm, unequivocal stance against far right extremism. You may not know this, but when we have the Prevent review take place, William Shawcross's review, which has probably been forgotten now, 2 or 3 years ago, and he said we're paying too much attention to far right. Guess what? We know what happened in August. So the government got it wrong. That government got it wrong. We've got to make sure this government gets it right, and we've got to strengthen law enforcement and intelligence against far right extremism. The people I spoke to at the security services tell me that the bulk of the intelligence they get is from minoritized communities who understand where the hatred is. They understand the violent rhetoric and where it's coming from. And so we need to ensure that, police and intelligence services need to be resourced to monitor and prevent far right activities in perhaps ways they haven't done before. We've got to recognize that the far right extremism plays on fear, anger, a sense of economic and social dislocation, but we're not responsible for that. We're not responsible for the fact that somebody in Blackpool has a life expectancy 10 years less than somebody in a metropolitan area. That's not down to black and brown people. That's because the governments over the years have let that city down or town down. They've let large parts of this country dismantle them in many respects. We talk about leveling up. That's never happened, but it's a root cause of why people feel they have to blame someone. And of course, then there are people who want you to blame people of color. So we need to address those grievances without giving space to extremism. We've got to strengthen education on equalities, diversity, and inclusion. And you know this better than I. But there's real pushback on that now. People are saying, I said at the outset, there's too much EDI going on. I did a review of London Fire Brigade, which you can read about, and I met with the 72 families lost their lives at Grenfell. And when I spoke to them, I said to them, what would have made a difference? And they said one thing. If one of us had been on the panel that decided what cladding goes on this building, they wouldn't have put the cheap flammable cladding on the building. That's a fact. The fact is that we need to be in the room when decisions are made about us. And when we're not in the room, 72 lives are lost. And so we've got to, that's the diversity inclusion is not about numbers. It's about better decision making. It's about ensuring that we, as a society, make the best decisions for all of us. And I think, I'll stop there, but can I leave you with one final thought, really, and that's about impact. It really touches me. I was doing graduation ceremonies last week at Manchester, about 3,000 young graduates for the winter ceremonies, and one young man, black young man, came on the stage. They only have like a fraction of a couple of seconds. They shake your hand because you're presiding, and he said, "Thank you for keeping me safe." And then he went off. I had no idea who he is. I'll never know who he was. But the fact is, that's what it's about. At the end of the day, I shouldn't have had to spend most of August telling everybody that I know, keep safe, keep safe, keep safe. I shouldn't have had to tell people in Middlesbrough whose car doors were being opened to check who was in the room or who was in the car to make sure they weren't black or brown. We shouldn't be in a society like that. Britain is better than that. And we are better than that. And I can assure you that I will work with you and SARI and others to ensure that the best of us are the ones who are heard, and we make sure that we do not have a repeat of what happened before. So thank you very much indeed.